part of it is about having two identities, isn't it? I mean, if you're an American, you can talk about being an Afro-American, a Polish-American, Italian-American. So in a sense, you get to be two things at once, but the central identity, which supposedly everybody signs up to, is American.
Yes, the identity is very important in talking about tolerance. The deeper and stronger the identity, especially if it's a cultural identity, it could be religiously based, it could be ethnically based, it could even be politically based. And those kinds of identities, the stronger they are, usually the less tolerance that's associated with those, with the intensity of those kinds of identities. The other sort of identity, apart from a cultural identity, is a civic identity. And to some extent in the United States, there is a civic identity. Because there is no one way of life, because there are so many different people with so many different religions and different customs, what holds them all together? What's the glue that holds them all together? Well, it's a civic identity, and it's a commitment to civic ideas and ideals. If you ask them what it means to be an American, they'll talk about their Constitution. They'll talk about the Declaration of Independence. They'll talk about these civic kinds of ideas that everyone can share. You can be an American if you believe in these civic goals, these civic ideas, these civic ideals. That makes you an American. And you can still practice you can still have your cultural differences. So to say that someone who is a Chinese American is not a real American, it doesn't make sense. It will strike many Americans as outrageous. Of course they're a real American if they are citizens and they believe in these civic ideals, because to suggest they're not a real American would suggest Swedish Americans, German Americans, and all the others aren't real Americans. And that's quite different from a cultural identity in a more homogeneous society. And that's why it's so difficult in a traditional nation state for someone to become genuinely Norwegian, say. What does it mean to become Norwegian? Well, you have to adopt the culture. You have to adopt the culture in Japan. You have to drink tea. In France, you have to smoke Gaulois cigarettes, right, and drink wine to be French. Whereas if there's a civic identity, it makes it easier for different groups. It's a thinner identity, but it's an identity everyone can share equally. And that's...
And certain values are expressed through it.
Yes, and certain values are expressed through it. Now, it's a little bit of an exaggeration to say that countries like the United States and Canada and Australia don't have cultural identities. They do. There are principles like individualism, which shape the society, or social egalitarianism to a very considerable degree. But there is this sense of a civic identity that embraces everybody, and you take up that identity, you become officially a citizen, you are an American, in a way that you can't ever become French, really, if you are an outsider and you have not completely assimilated to French culture.
Yes, you in a sense, you learn to be a French person.
Yes, yes, as Sarkozy did, as Nicolas Sarkozy did.
And Walzer says that for tolerance to exist, there has to be the possibility that someone will leave behind the assumptions of the ethnicity and or religion. Why has that got to be the case?
Well, it's... The more I see myself as part of a group, and the deeper my connection with that group, the more likely it is that I'm going to feel apart from people who are different, apart from people in other groups. That who I am is this group, and this way of life, and this way of believing. And that separates me from other people. It distances me from other people. And it accentuates what may be a hardwired or a soft-wired tendency that human beings have to be uneasy in the face of difference. Difference tends to make us uneasy. It's hard to get along with difference, to live with difference. There's an experiment that was done in the psychology department in Stanford a couple of years ago, where the psychologists put two groups of people, white Americans and black Americans, into a machine that scans their brain and can identify activity in different parts of the brain. And he was focusing particularly on the part of the brain that involves fight, flight responses. And so as he put the white Americans in, he showed them photographs of black Americans. And sure enough, they got into the machine and the fight-flight parts of their brains lit up. Likewise, when the black Americans were put in and shown photographs of white Americans as they were going into the machine, fight-flight responses lit up. But then he reran the experiment with other groups, other white American groups and black American groups, and as he put them into the machine, instead of just showing them photographs of people of other races, he told them that they were going to be shown these photographs, and their task was to decide whether the person, it's hard to believe that this was the task, but it was, whether this individual liked Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola best. And by George, nothing lit up in the fight-flight area of the brain. And his explanation was that he had gotten them to focus on the person as an individual rather than as a member of a different group. And when they focused on them as an individual, their fundamental pre-conscious emotional reaction was really quite different. So we may be somewhat, we may to some extent be hardwired, as a suggestion, to be uneasy with difference. But the experiment suggests that you can culturally, through teaching and education, nonetheless lead people to be less uneasy about difference.
You set up a course at the University of North Carolina to teach tolerance. What prompted you to do this?
Well, I'm very aware, living in America and in Britain and traveling, as many people are, and as I imagine you are, Russell, that the world is shrinking. The world is shrinking much faster than we ever expected it to shrink. And we're all living with difference, inevitably, far more than we ever expected to be in our lifetimes. And we have to learn to deal with it. We have to learn to accommodate. We have to learn to make it work. We are all in it together, and we need to figure out how to do it best. And I think toleration is the pathway. It's the pathway that most people would suggest that we need to do that. So it was an awareness of this phenomenon of increasingly living with difference. And then also I was teaching a course in democracy. And one of the sections of the course had to do with toleration. That section was the most popular section with the students, and it was actually the one I liked teaching the best. And so I thought that it might be interesting to develop it into a full-blown course, which I did. And it's the course I enjoy teaching the most, by far.